Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today, last time I recorded, I actually had additional topics that I just forgot to record on. So I've taken copious quantities of notes for today's recording, and hopefully that'll make things a lot better. So, as noted, we have two house guests with us currently. They're going on a bike ride with my wife, which gives me a few minutes to record a podcast, which is always a luxury. I wanted to talk a little bit about 6 months since the Pletinckx medals arrived. I've learnt a lot of stuff through this time, and I've never really had an opportunity to record information specifically about the Pletinckx medals or really my exploration into medal collecting as a thing in general. And part of that is that it's very curious. The whole medal collecting hobby is very strange, and it's in many ways prefaced. I mean, I find this even with regards to my knowledge of the Second World War, that some of it is just not appropriate in common society. I had a project at work where I had the opportunity to name it. And because of what it was, my initial thought was to name it after films about the Second World War. And then I realized that this wasn't, we learn about inclusion and diversity, and the Second World War doesn't breed inclusion and diversity. So the medal collecting thing is very curious, because really the only medals of value, that are of value, come from the Second World War. You go outside that area, and this is the Pletinckx medals fundamentally, they don't really hold the value. So if we want to talk about provenance, I found more information about the Pletinckx medals after I purchased them. I found the previous auction, which was in 2015, where they were sold in their current form onto, I'm assuming, the folks that I bought them from. And they were sold at about 40% of what I paid for them, which I think is probably about right. I mean, you're dealing with a store, brick and mortar store that has a physical location in central London. I'm not particularly fussed by that. But what it made me realize is that these medals within the medal collecting hobby do not have an intrinsic value. They are, they don't have the same value that the Second World War medals have. And what I've explored through this as well, so the medals that I purchased were attempted to be sold maybe 6 months prior to me purchasing them. And I don't know how much they were trying to sell them for then, but they had added a few new medals to the group and tried to pass them off as the Pletinckx medals. And then after I purchased the Pletinckx medals, which I don't think I've narrated in any podcast, I was contacted again. Well, after my wife purchased them, I was contacted. They had 2 additional medals which I purchased, which were supposed to be from the Pletinckx set, but they weren't in the Pletinckx auction from 2015, although medals that looked the same were on the prominent drawing of Pletinckx where he has, 16 odd medals. So it was very interesting, and I started to learn actually through this process that medal sales houses frequently do that. They frequently find additional medals and try to, fill out gaps, so to speak, in this thing. Because I think ultimately the provenance of medals is very poor. Now, since this time, I've made 2 additional medal purchases. I should point that out. I purchased a set of medals and documents, including the prisoner of war records, but no actual photographs, of a fellow who was not even an officer in the German army in the Second World War. He fought in basically all the major theatres except for North Africa. And he has a really fascinating story around it. I mean, his narrative is probably just as interesting as Pletinckx in some fundamental sense. His grandson is on Facebook, and his grandson is in his 50s. So, but there are no actual photographs of them. But his grandson, you can look at his face and think, okay, so his grandfather, when I saw the photo of his grandson, I thought, this is like I see this man as being. He was a tailor out of the war, and he had quite a decorated history and did a lot of really interesting stuff, but never really pushed beyond a particular rank. And he was fascinating because when he was in the French prisoner of war camp, he was very heavily interviewed and corralled, associated with whether he was a Nazi, whether he was a member of the NSDAP. And he wasn't, even though he had, friends and associates that were part of that. He wasn't a Nazi at all. And he ended up working in the camps, actually, and getting paid in the camps as well. But it's a fascinating history to look at this fellow who was born just as the First World War started. I think his father was killed in the First World War, and then his trajectory into military service and his survival, kind of miraculous survival through the Second World War. Even though he'd been part of Barbarossa, he was very thankfully on the, the western side of, the Berlin Divide, and was picked up by the French. And then he has all the paperwork associated with that. And that, to me, was fascinating. I love the history part of this as well. So that made me realize that of the medal collection, probably a couple of the medals in that collection had also just been loose medals that were thrown in. One of the stickers of one of the medals as a loose medal was in fact attached to the packaging material of the parcel that was sent. And through this as well, I realized what the value... Well, firstly, I learnt what the medals meant in the German army in the First and Second World War and also earlier wars. I'd never really gone through that process. So I have done an additional kind of history dive, but I don't think I'm going to buy any more medals. The Pletinckx set, I have finally, literally as of last night, done a full translation of his biography and have a printed version, 2 printed versions of that coming towards me, because Pletinckx is pretty well... I have him as my, not screensaver, but my, what do you call it, the background graphics on computers. There are some photos of him in the late 19th century looking considerably more disheveled. I mean, when he's in, a man of his 70s, not quite as proud as the earlier, drawings of him. But this was also the period of time where he did his work in the Franco-Prussian War and got awarded from both sides, although the medal history does not show, I originally thought that the German medal that he received through the Franco-Prussian War had been sold by the folks that sold me the medals. But it appears that it wasn't part of the set that was sold at auction in 2015. So that obviously disappeared earlier. And the 2015 auction was interesting. It went to a charity called MIND in the UK, which I probably should look more up about. But yeah, the sale of those medals went to a charity. So as part of a charitable donation or something. Anyway, so that's the Pletinckx experience. That's my deep toe dipping in, medal collecting. But yeah, without the history, without the written history, I mean, I see a lot of, individual medals and individual, certificates and stuff go online. It doesn't really interest me. And there are a few, things that I see with photo records. So one of them, as an example, was one of the camp guards, on the camp leadership, actually, of a concentration camp. And I looked at that and I just thought, where's the value in these documents? They've already been, thoroughly gone through. They were charging £3,500, I think. Actually, there were a set of documents that had been split up. If you added them all together, it would have been about £5,000. I just thought these documents have been poured over so much. There's no authentic meat left in them. It just basically shows this guy was incredibly vain and liked, ordering from various Nazi-attributed fashion houses. So, that was all very curious. You end up in these worlds with these things which are, I don't think worth what the dollar amount is supposed to be. So, in the future, could some other medals come my way? I don't know. Highly unlikely. Without a really juicy, interesting narrative behind them, it's not really what I'm in this thing for. So that's the conclusion to the Pletinckx experience so far. I'm going to go through the biography with a fine-tooth comb. The question is always there to rewrite the biography in proper spoken English, not poorly translated French. Maybe a project, who knows. I think the romance, you've got, Barry Lyndon, you've got the duelists, you've got these movies about people that existed in, not necessarily this time specifically, but what makes an interesting film of these events? Well, the duelist, was interesting in some regard. Barry Lyndon is just a curious story. And I think Pletinckx is a curious story. There's a lot of intrigue and a lot of stuff associated with the creation of the Belgian state, which I guess for Belgian nationalists, that might be something that's interesting. For general folk, maybe not so much. He's a kind of curious, kind of Forrest Gump-like character in terms of just being at the right places at the right time. I think he's probably got more intellect in some regards, some more nuances perhaps than strict Forrest Gump in this. But it's the same with the German fellow that I've, have his medals and documents for. It's the same thing. You get a sense that this person had an amazingly interesting life. That in and of its insight and the reading and the surrounding stuff, this is basically what I'm in it for. And the other aspects to it just strike me as a little bit surreal. I recorded a video on Monty's reviews recently where I talked a little bit about the Operation Sea Lion myth. And this is something that I feel really strongly about. And it's something that as I've done more reading about it, I've realized that Operation Sea Lion is a strange touch point. And the way it's been prefaced primarily on the Nazi release documentation, but also like what has been embraced associated with Operation Sea Lion, I just find considerably curious. This is also, and I have these books around me somewhere, this is also the bolt action rules for Operation Sea Lion and basically all the books that are written on Operation Sea Lion are based on the one very paper-thin, Nazi-linked street directory, which really is a very curious document to base anything on. And what I also found interesting was I was reading that when Sea Lion was played as a war game, here actually like a war game with, I'm assuming, probability and these kind of things by the US military, they used 80,000 infantry troops and 60,000 paratroopers to represent what Sea Lion would have been in the German forces. In the video, I explore this notion that Operation Sea Lion has always had a kind of softly narrative associated with it. The view that the Nazis would have landed millions of men is never talked about with regards to Sea Lion. It's interesting when you look at it in contrast with Barbarossa, where it was like 3.8 million men were part of Barbarossa. The Nazis would have used something similar with Sea Lion, I would have thought. In the order of maybe 3 million men. I mean, they wouldn't have done it. The whole notion that they would have done it with, 140,000 troops just strikes me as really very strange. The fact that people would even, this is the extent of the discourse associated with Sea Lion. And I think there's a genuine underlying fear of if you talked about Sea Lion in terms of what it would have practically have been like, that it actually produces it's just it's a taboo subject. Sea Lion, to its full extent, is a taboo subject. You can't discuss it associated with substantial numbers of troops landing. And the notion really that the wave of troops probably wouldn't have, stopped until they hit Manchester. They would have just sailed through the UK defences. You see this, I watch kind of canal boat and walking videos in the UK, and you see them occasionally passing pillboxes, and you just think, against, 3 million highly motivated German troops, what's going on here? You got Dad's army perched in a few pillboxes. And I think that psychology really, people don't want to admit, they don't want to realise how close potentially the UK was for being completely and utterly decimated. And certainly it would have been a circumstance where, everyone was so far, the US was so far behind in that circumstance that would have severely changed the outcome of the Second World War. And ultimately, Barbarossa probably would have occurred after that as well. But Germany would have been in a distinctly different place if there was no location to amass troops for D-Day, potentially through North Africa, potentially through a variety of different factors. But still, it would have been a very different war if Sea Lion to its full capacity had actually occurred. I wonder what Sea Lion to its true extent played as a war game would actually look like. The offerings from Bolt Action are very poor. I don't even know if it would have been street fighting. I don't even know if it would have been like that. I think you would have had probably a lot of encirclement, perhaps multiple Stalingrads. I mean, that would be interesting to play out, London as Stalingrad, Birmingham as Stalingrad. These things play out very curiously. So the nature of war games as simulation, I think, is really fascinating here. It was something that came up in a video. I wanted to talk a little bit more about it here. Let us discuss the lead pile. So when I last recorded, I hadn't really... There's lots of things have actually changed since I've last recorded. We're going to be probably living a good portion of next year in Las Vegas and Southern California. And my hope is that we'll find a place in Southern California and live a good portion in SoCal. But we'll probably just end up going back to our house in Las Vegas and then, finding a base in SoCal as we need it. And that is quite a substantial move for us. I mean, I think it's all doable, but it's just something that takes time and energy and probably will impact podcasts in a certain way. And this has been, in some regard, the motivating force, the motivating influence in getting the lead pile under control. So what I have done, the fellow in Aptos, close by, I've given him a cut-off date. He will not finish what he has by the cutoff date. It's mid-October. So he'll send me back everything that he hasn't started, and he'll aim to finish a bunch of stuff by that date. But for me, it was a little disappointing because basically he's had them for, I don't know, in terms of his dedicated time, maybe 4.5 months. And really, he's kind of struggled painting a unit of Terminators through that time. And he had maybe 3 or 4 times that following, but he just has no capacity for that. The stuff on the East Coast, I'm in the final commission for that. We've worked out the money. I've paid on par with half of that. A little bit left to go in the previous commission as well, but that isn't yet completed. So that is looking as a body of work as something that's doable. I'll probably get it back early next quarter, early quarter, first quarter 2021. My friend Rochi near Hull, he's in a position currently where he's working between 40 and 60 hours a week on my lead pile. And he's getting more into the kind of specialist-specific figure painting, which is really the antithesis of what I need. So what I'm saying to him is now pick out figures that you want to do that to. By all means, do that to them. But also there are like large banks of just get some paint on them army kind of things that he probably needs to think about as well. He's having a lot of fun doing the high detail stuff, and you'll see that from my Facebook feed. But at the same point, I've said, look, winter's coming. I don't necessarily want him to go through kind of winter burnout where he's working, 60-hour weeks through winter. It's just not particularly civilized, low light, all these kind of things. But he's pretty insistent that he wants to maintain that kind of slog. And my preference is volume to a certain extent. I mean, the quality is beautiful, but there's a lot of volume stuff that needs to be done as well. And I'd like him to kind of slog through some of that volume and get some of the quality. So an interesting balance there. He will be the kind of continuing 2021 figure painter. And through the stuff he's producing currently, I have no problem with that. But, it's getting the blend right associated with kind of mass figures and individual figure painting through that. I was originally going to send him a bunch more stuff, particularly if we were going to use both the spare rooms, both the guest room and my normally podcasting game room for a guest. Then I was going to send him additional stuff. I've got some Valhalla, some original Harlequin figures, and a few other bits and pieces I was going to get him. But I held on to them with the view that he's got plenty to work on, and, we'll just work through what he has. We'll work through the times, these kind of things. I'm not particularly fussed with regards to that. So I talked a little bit about the move next year. Part of it is probably just in a kind of December time frame, packing things up and getting things ready. And I'm trying to minimize the amount of stuff that's in storage, particularly because hopefully we will have our house back in Las Vegas, and that has a good quantity. I mean, that's basically a modern version of the house that we own currently. We own both of them, but it's a modern version of where we live currently. So, but then again, the view is if we stay longer, then we'll probably sell the Vegas house. And, there are all these bits and pieces that have to, it's like a Tetris game. So it's working all these things out. And part of that is probably, we're just rounding out, we're doing the last session of the Just Plain Chaos game. And then I'm debating actually taking a break. I think I'll probably need a break through all the moving and iteration and low light levels and all this kind of stuff. Maybe resuming the Just Plain Chaos games early in the year, maybe running 3 or 4 sessions in various areas. The feedback that I've received from my coworkers in particular is they like floating games. So they like games where they may or may not be able to attend, where it's a kind of returning theme that they can get back into. I wasn't really working on that. I was working on a lot more kind of narrative scenario stuff. But, it was all very interesting to work through, what's going to happen, particularly with the move as well. Concluding the final session, thinking about, of the sessions that I was planning on running maybe a few micro sessions, a few 2 or 3 game sessions, and just working out how to fill the end of the year with the additional chaos associated with moving and getting a variety of other things in order. So I think I've given a sizable update here, associated with a variety of different things. Thank you very much for continuing to put up with these ever, diverging, moving, changing perspective things associated with these, these recordings. I think my hope is that, Southern California and Las Vegas are very different associated with their gaming environments. COVID is no friend to any of this. And how that plays out, I don't know. I mean, obviously COVID in some regard plays out to some move-related stuff as well. But to be frank, my wife is completely burnt out of Northern California. It looks like the gang wars that went on in 2016. Was it 32 people killed within a mile radius of our house? That was 2016 for us. So the notion that this might happen again, my wife is just, that's it. We're moving to Vegas. That's it. So, but for some period at least, we will continue to have this place in Northern California, probably, vacant for some period of time. And, the whole thing is just very, very curious. But, yeah, COVID also obviously plays a role in this as well. So my hope is to be in a better environment for a good portion of next year. And that, I think, will probably be contributive to just good cognitive development and good rules development and a variety of things with which this particular recording should profit. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.